So 2025 will mark the 30th anniversary for many classic hip hop albums that had dropped in the year of 1995, which was one of my favorite years for hip hop. Now, I'm not going to get to review every album that will be turning 30 this year, but I did want to start out the year with a really important one that had dropped January 10th. 95. What is good, y'all? It's your boy Mixtape Muff. If you are rocking with this content, go ahead and smash that like button for your boy. Also subscribe if you haven't. But today I'm going to be revisiting Smif-n-Wessun's debut classic, The Shinin. So Tech and Still of Smif-n-Wessun are one of the nicest duos in hip hop history when it comes to the back and forth. Of course, Smif-n-Wessun are also two members who make up the legendary and unsung Brooklyn rap collective known as the Bootcamp Clik. But in 1993, Black Moon had set off the whole bootcamp duckdown movement with their classic debut album, Enter the Stage. That album was very integral to the development of New York 90s hip hop. Fast forward roughly 2 years later, after much hype from their Bucktown single, Smif-n-Wessun will be next up to drop their critically acclaimed The Shinin. Now, there have always been a few things about this album that instantly stood out to me. One would have to be all the Jamaican patois that Tech and Still incorporate into their rhymes, hooks, and vocal inflections. And the crazy thing about it is they weren't even Jamaican. Instead, they were Black American. But I bet I wasn't the only person who listened to Smif-n-Wessun back in the day who thought that Smif-n-Wessun and other members of Bootcamp had some Jamaican heritage. Another thing about this album was that it represented Timberland boots like no other New York album quite has. This project is associated with heavy Timberland stomping throughout New York City pavement. And the last thing is that this album is one of the most authentically Brooklyn sounding projects to exist. Sure, there are a lot of projects that feel intrinsically Brooklyn, but none quite like The Shinin. So this project featured production from the slept-on producer duo known as the Beatminerz, consisting of DJ Evil D and Mr. Walt, but it also had additional production from Baby Paul. It contains 16 songs lasting approximately an hour and 7 minutes. But with that being said, let me go ahead and just hit y'all with that track-by-track breakdown. The opener, Tim's and Hood Check, is a hard as nails banger. You had the booming bass line, the infectious scratching, and the whole aesthetic here just screams 1995 New York hip hop. Tech and Still were coming out hard with that explosive energy, just catching wreck. Still said Smif-n-Wessun out of Bucktown starting mad trouble, played a hard rock, we break your block down to rubble. Overall, an insanely good opener that just set that rugged tone out the gate. Track 2, Wreck Time, produced by Mr. Walt, was also raw but slightly more playful. What you had here was an anthem-like hook, a flawless back and forth between the two over thick drums and a quirky bass line. But then things turned quite a bit darker for the following track, One Time, a top 3 song from the album, which easily had the eeriest instrumental. Now, I can't quite articulate how great this instrumental is, but it has a beat that will give you both the instant screw face, yet also have you in this hypnotic trance like you are bobbing your head in a dark subway tunnel. Rock Nest Monster kills the hook and the vocal sample is so hard. Tech had the memorable lines. There's the black moon, we creeping in your room. Death fills the air along with the scent of boom. Yeah, this song was so gutter, yet also cerebral, and I think that's what makes it so darn classic. Next was the more up-tempo Recognize. This was the original version, of course, not the 5-mic remix with that Bill Withers sample produced by Baby Paul. Now, I always viewed this version as similar in quality to the 2 singles on Enter the Stage, which later would have remixes that were better than the original. So as grimy as this version was, looking back on it, I had almost wished the remix could have replaced it on the album. It's my only slight gripe. Following this is the 5 Mic song Soundboy Burial, a track that represents some of the best rapping and reggae fusion at the time. It was the perfect merging of those two styles. That minimalist head nodding production that was made for back alley ciphers. And of course, this would be the track that had some of Bootcamp's biggest nods to Jamaican and soundboy culture at the time. This also featured OGC. Now, I would have to say the remix version, which appeared on the B-side to the recognized remix, was even better, but that's just duck down remixes for you. I mean, they never missed in that remix department. Then there was KIM, or Keep It Moving, which was a motivation anthem that, well, just puts you in a good mood. The bright, funky horn echo was very in step with the sounds of late 94, early 95 production. Bootcamp still had their share of quotables. Still said nightmares don't scare me, but what happens at night got me leery. And Tech had the ill lines. We coming through. All you hear is Tim Boots stomping, got you in your drawers, just staring, looking, watching. But afterwards was their landmark single, Bucktown, a 5 Mic Brooklyn tribute. It was the single that generated the most buzz for the album. The blunted saxophone and the crisp drums were the ideal backdrop for Tech and Still to talk about their home of the original gun clappers. And there was even some low-key social commentary despite the gun bars, like when Still said, "Pigs look me up and down with a frown. Is it because I'm brown or is it because I'm from Bucktown?" And some other dope lines that stuck with me over the years were, "I find reality follows me where I roam 360 degrees back home." Following this was the Perseverance record, Stand Strong, a more up-tempo but rugged track that brought the listener more into the mentality or the mindset of someone coming up in Bucktown. Tech reflected on how he felt trapped in a Bucktown state of mind, while Still talked about building, but still staying on point. Track 9 was the 2-part Shinin' and Next Shit. Now, the first was just a funky, flavorful instrumental, while the second was dreamy boom bap for those on the Bob Marley blunted tip. The beat on Next Shit just always made me envision people walking snow-covered Brooklyn streets as the sun is starting to go down. And Buckshot had an appearance at the end with his hypnotic refrain, "Stoned is the way of the walk. In New York is real, so we pack still." Definitely a complete Brooklyn vibe with this one. Next was the very underrated Posse track, Session at the Dog Hilly, which featured Bootcamp members catching wreck over such a unique Beatminerz instrumental. From the flute to the spacey synth and the vocal echo, this was a perfect instrumental for a Posse cut. It is here where we first heard from the late great Sean P. Rock also had a fantastic verse, but I feel it was Steele who really stole the show, being the MVP of the track. But let me know in the comments section who you thought had the best verse. Immediately after was another gem, Hallucination. What you had here was vivid storytelling over a ghostly beat from DJ Evil D. The way he chopped up the Minnie Riperton sample was impressive. And this beat, which was very fitting for its name, will likely take you on some psychedelic voyage. But yeah, Hallucination sonically may have been ahead of its time, and it's definitely a top 3 to 5 song on the project. Then there was Home Sweet Home, which was an ode to their borough of Brooklyn, and this contains the well-known Roy Ayers sample, "We Live in Brooklyn, Baby," which had already been used by Diggable Planets in '94, and later Mos Def would go on to use this as well as other artists. I also have to point out that the cover art for The Shinin' was directly inspired by the Roy Ayers album that contained this "We Live in Brooklyn" track. Yeah, the cover art from The Shinin' was another reason it was so spectacular. But yeah, this song definitely painted a portrait of Tech and Still just stalking the dark streets of Bed-Stuy and Flatbush, where you had to step with precaution. After this was the more upbeat Wipe Your Mouth, produced by Baby Paul, which had that brighter jazz sample. This, of course, was an anti-dick rider anthem. The liquor shot hook from Tech was ear-grabbing for sure. Then the second and last song, Let's Get It On, was a definitive Bootcamp Clik record, just as good as any of the original Black Moon singles. You had Tech and Steel dumbing out over a neck-snapping Beatminerz tune, coming through with that aggressive back and forth vocal, something strictly for the hard rocks, and the bass line was one of the dopest on the album. And this project closes out on a sentimental note with p.n.c. standing for Partners in Crime. It was a heartfelt dedication to their deceased friend Sean Grady. It also had one of the smoothest yet most melancholic beats on the album. Now, the flavor of the production could have honestly fit Tupac. But yeah, a fantastic closer where both Tech and Steel's vocals sound as majestic and soothing as ever. So overall, I do view this as a classic album. Now, for some, this just may only be a personal classic, or some might view it as strictly an East Coast classic, but it is clearly a definitive mid-90s release that added on a great deal to what Black Moon established in 93. Yeah, aggressive, hardcore, psychedelic, yet cerebral. 30 years later, the Shinin.